United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mr. McIntyre?
Here.
Mr. Chapman? Here. Mr. Peach?
Here.
Administrator Jones?
Here. All right. Request for modifications and approval of the agenda.
As per yesterday's work session, I'm bringing forward to ask as item 3C, a notice of hearing to be held at 10:30 a.m. August 4th regarding a proposed grant from the Opportunity Fund to the City of Los Angeles. And as item 3B, a notice of hearing to be held at 10:30 a.m. August 4th regarding a proposed grant from the Opportunity Fund to the Port Plan.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Public comment on agenda items.
No, you're going to be in the reports and presentations.
Yeah. Okay. Just a moment there, Andy. We'll get you here in a minute. Public comment on agenda items. Please come forward. Ken, how are you?
Good morning. I'll speak against the grant to accomplish this again. I think that it's a very risky investment at best and a bad investment at worst. I think the county could use that money for better things than that project. I see the Ford has acquired more funding, so do they really need our $1 million? We could probably use that for better things. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? See a hand in the back?
This is for an agenda item.
Yes, ma'am.
Charlie Shample in Washington. I want to comment on the appointments. To the reappointments, I should say, to not just reappoint. My concern is about these reappointments, though I'm very appreciative of many citizen volunteering. I know it's hard to get volunteers, but we need diversity in that department. And we need you to reach out to citizens that have different points of view. If people don't come forward to apply. One of the largest turnouts in your administration has been the no spray issue. People overwhelmingly said they wanted a change in that department's perspective. This is the time to begin that change. There are 3 positions open. The people that applied, and you're thinking of reappointing, are the same volunteers, and of course we appreciate their involvement in the past. But this is the time to start reaching out for other perspectives. You're elected to represent the people and their safety, and not just what the staff wants. I'm really asking you to rethink these appointments and start considering the overall structure of that department and start reaching out and getting a blend of perspectives, people that know other ways of doing things and can make this a much safer community. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? All right, consent agenda.
Thank you. Item 1A is approval of vouchers for the week of July 13th, and item 1B is approval of minutes for the week of July 13th.
Adoption of the consent agenda.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Reports and presentations. Okay, Andy, you're up.
Finally. Good morning. Morning, Brasted. I wanted to introduce our 2 new employees in environmental health. Andy Clallam, he's an environmental health specialist. He's going to be working on hospital. And this is Jessica Newberg. She is with customer service at the counter. She's got many years interviewing fishermen. So she he's dealt with a lot of people from here, so it's great to have. The most difficult thing about them is that we have now 2 Andys and 2 Jessicas, and so we're still trying to sort that all out. But I just want you to know and see.
Well, and I can tell you from personal experience, sailors are just the finest people in the world. If you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell. Welcome. Glad you're here. Commissioner Chapman. Commissioner Beach.
I'm attending an RCMD meeting Thursday, an initiative we're up against is funding that we anticipated from Department of Commerce is not occurring. And so we're currently in a situation where we've got about 2 months cash flow to operate. And so we'll be having some serious conversation about what to do about that. But when I heard about our financial situation, I stepped up and volunteered to be treasurer. I'd like to monitor this and make sure that we don't inherit any liabilities.
Thanks for following on that hand grenade. That's a significant task for the group. My only report is a conference call with the County Association Legislative Steering Committee last week. It was kind of a preliminary legislative session wrap-up conversation. There will be forthcoming a fairly exhaustive analysis of all the legislation that passed this session and has been signed into law by the governor that affect county government and probably city government as well. So that'll be forthcoming. It's in preparation right now. And the second purpose of the call was to modify the county associations, all of our legislative agenda, to account for the things that appear to be going nowhere in the legislature and or have been accomplished by the legislature. So the information that was presented for that, the agenda and the background material for that call is on the table for everybody to look at and see, and we'll be seeing show up in our email account here in the next several days, I'm sure, a kind of a post-session analysis and wrap-up from the County Association. They just did a great job of trying to shepherd the County Association's agenda through the legislature. And it was a tough session, as we all know. So that's my report. Administrator Jones. Contracts and agreements.
Item 2A is an agreement with the Department of Commerce, Office of Crime Victims Advocacy for Victim Witness Assistance Program activities, as was discussed yesterday in work session. Total grant award of $38,854.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Item 2B is an agreement with the Department of Social and Health Services, Juvenile Justice and Rehabilitation Administration for evidence-based expansion. As was discussed yesterday in work session, this is just a bridge contract to get to the fiscal year 16-17 final contract, which will be forthcoming.
Adoption. Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Item 2C is an agreement with the Department of Social and Health Services, Juvenile Justice and Rehabilitation Administration consolidated contract for fiscal year 16-17. Again, as was discussed yesterday in work session, it is a bridge contract to get to the final contract sometime in September.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Item 2D is an agreement with the Washington State Department of Transportation for improvements to the La Push Road. Maximum amount of money from WSDOT is $331,000, as was discussed yesterday in work session.
Adoption. Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye.
2E is an agreement with the Washington State Department of Transportation Federal Highways Administration Federal Lands Access Program. And this is a funding match for improvements to East Beach Road, as was discussed in work session back on July 13th. And this documents a $229,500 county match on a $1,700,000 total project.
Move adoption.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Administration.
Item 3A is a resolution appointing members to the Noxious Weed Advisory Board, namely Fred Grant, appointed to fill the position representing Geographic Area 1 for a term expiring July 1st, 2019, and 2, Sheila Dorf Miller, appointed to fill the position representing Geographic Area 2 for a term expiring July 1st, 2019.
Kristen, how many applications? I didn't see how many
We didn't
applications.
receive any applications at all. And
That
both
was
these
going to be my
people
question.
indicated they wish to be
We
reappointed.
advertised online.
We advertised, the deadline was 4:30 yesterday, and we had 3 come in at 4:30, but they work for this board.
Adoption of the resolution.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion? That was going to be my exact question too. So. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Item 3B is a notice of hearing to be held August 4th regarding proposed amendments to Policy 120, Board of Commissioners Operating Guidelines.
Move adoption of the hearing.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion?
They're issuing notice.
Issuing the notice.
Notice.
Move the call for the hearing.
There was an amended motion as the second for the amended motion as well. Correct? Okay. Moved and seconded. Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Item 3C is a notice of hearing to be held at 10:30 a.m. August 4th regarding a proposed grant from the Opportunity Fund to the City of Port Angeles.
I'll move the call for the hearing on August 4th. I will have a question.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion?
On items 3C and 3D, I have a question for the county prosecutor. You've been advising us along the way, and I was just making sure you weren't available, part of our discussion yesterday, but we talked about moving forward with a public hearing regarding the City of Port Angeles grant request, the Port of Port Angeles grant request. I just want to clarify with you that you're comfortable with the board's taking this next step to have a public hearing, since you've been advising us through this process.
Yes, very much so.
Do you have anything else you want to add? Or?
I think, that's one of the issues that's obviously been at the heart of the disagreement. The treasurer has expressed her opinion that a public hearing would be helpful. Frankly, I think it does provide a nice opportunity for any interested folks to show up and provide their input. It also provides an opportunity for example, a presentation by the board as to what's happened and process considerations. So it's a nice opportunity for hearing to take, and will help to educate the community and any inquiring minds about the proposals.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks. Okay, did we have a second of a move or? Okay, second. Okay, that was the discussion. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
And item 3D is a notice of hearing to be held at 10:30 a.m. August 4th regarding a proposed grant from the Opportunity Fund to the Port of Port Angeles.
So, move the call for the public hearing August 4th at 10:30 a.m. I have a question for Jim.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. Go ahead.
So, we'll have a hearing, prosecutor's good with us having a hearing, you're gonna have some sort of contract for us to consider at that hearing, or some sort of document that will memorialize a potential course of action?
Yes, for yesterday's work session, the county prosecutor and I were asked to work together to come up with a contract recommended by his office for both of these parties.
Okay.
So we will have it.
You're good with that process as well?
Yes, we'll have a proposed contract prepared for board consideration.
Great.
For both matters.
Appreciate you guys working on that.
Yeah, sure. Me
Thanks,
too.
Mark.
Thank you. Thanks one and all. Okay, moved and seconded. Discuss. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Community development.
Item consideration of final plat approval for subdivision alteration of O'Brien Meadows Phase 3, Kevin and Connie Foster, and Beth Askin and Joseph Abel applicants.
This is approval of a subdivision alteration of the O'Brien Meadows Phase 3. The objective is to adjust the property lines of lots 18 and 19 to absorb lot 19 to become part of lots 18 and 20. So it's taking 3 parcels, turning it into 2. The resulting parcels will be 3.387 acres and 3.078 acres. An open public meeting was conducted on April 22nd, 2015, and the decision was rendered with 10 conditions on April 29th, 2015. The 10 conditions have been met, and so here's the plat for you guys to sign, to final it.
Right, move adoption of the final plat approval.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. Thanks as always.
No problem. We'll see it later.
Shepherding these very complex issues to a successful conclusion.
Thanks, guys.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. No bids and awards, no budget, no public works. We have 2 hearings scheduled at 10:30. I can't see the clock all that well, but it looks like we're about 11 minutes away from 10:30. So we will have let's move our public comments up. If anybody cares to comment, Peter, good morning, how are you? Missed you, haven't seen you in a while.
Well, I guess I'll have to just yell loudly.
The one time I didn't prepare for you, you decided to talk.
Yeah, well,
There you go.
a loose cannon. Peter Ripley, 114 East 6th Street, apartment 102, Port Angeles. Good morning, Commissioners. I would like to talk about 25 years ago, the then President H.W. Bush signed in the law, the ADA. And over the years, many advances have been made. You know, we've got curb cuts and such and stuff. But overall, I shared in my report today a story about the 50% of people with disabilities are still in poverty level. Well, what's going on? Why is that continuing? Why is that happening? Why are people with disabilities are still having to rely on Uncle Sam to exist from month to month? I think we need to work on turning that a little bit around. A lot of people with disabilities are still under the societal stereotypes that still afflict us. People with disabilities are often marginalized, underestimated, or even maybe perhaps overestimated. The thing is, we're people like anyone else. It's because we get around differently, walk differently, talk a little different, look a little different. Doesn't mean we're non-human. And I hope that society can look past the disability and look at the person behind it. And I hope that the next 25 years, those kind of stereotypes will diminish greatly. Maybe not in my lifetime, but I hope that future generations, things will change for the better. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you. I said I missed your smiling face here, Peter. Nice to see you back. Okay, anybody else?
Can I just make a public comment, Jim?
Yes, sir.
My name's Larry Campbell. I'd like to approach you out the bench after you're done at the end of the meeting. Is that okay?
Very nice to see you again. I haven't seen you in a while.
Okay, I just want your permission.
You bet.
Thank you.
After we get done with the hearings, Larry, feel free.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, my name is Mike Doherty. I live at 617 South B. I'd like to follow up on some comments that I made a couple weeks ago about the Public Meetings Act compliance. And I have 2 items to submit towards the board. One is a daily news story from June 25th, 2015. It's supposed to be attached to the minutes. So there was some issue on the audio file about where I was on the meeting that I raised the issue about the Public Meetings Act. I'd actually been asked to be a representative of the state of Washington at a West Coast Climate Summit, as they called it, at Stanford University. And so at no cost to the county, I went and explained a role as principal investigator on a National Aeronautics and Space Administration project. So I checked with the board's agenda while I was in there, probably Thursday, Friday. Didn't see anything listed on the work session that concerned me, and there was nothing listed under correspondence. Then I checked again, I believe it was either Tuesday morning early or Monday or Tuesday morning early, and nothing had been added. There had been no amended agenda sent out. So when I checked, there was still nothing that concerned me. So on the audio file, actually, the county administrator mentions that I couldn't plan to call in at 10 o'clock, which I did. So I had a number of concerns about the Open Meeting Act. So one, there wasn't a change on the agenda when the item comes up that I was going to talk about. So no change on the agenda, no motion to change the agenda, no acceptance of a change on the agenda. And theoretically and in practice, all board members should be treated equally about items coming before the board for business, particularly decisions. And later, that key word was used, making decisions, and I'll come to that. So there were a couple of other things. I can't get into it in a short amount of time, but there was a definite lack of notice to me as one board member. There's also a lack of notice to the public and to the press about the item that came up. And then if you look at the file, the audio, or listen to the audio file, there's two documents discussed. One is a communication from Department of Natural Resources, and one is the communication from a timber company. Those two items were not available apparently when I asked the Daily News, and so the press was left out, and this board member was left out. And again, all board members are being treated equally as far as dispersion of information. So I think there was a duty there of the administrator, board members, plus just tradition, policy, and law to have informed me of that item. Now, in the discussion, there were several things, and I can't get into all of it in a short amount of time, but there was a discussion, actually a decision about sending a letter. And I think if you read the operating guidelines of the board and the tradition, it would have been more proper to have sent a resolution, again, with 3 board members having notice, having the item on the agenda, having the prepared agenda resolution if it was ready. And sometimes they've been tweaked in the past between a work session and a regular meeting, but this wasn't even noticed, let alone provided at least to this commissioner or the meeting. So then when it comes up in the work session, and I'd encourage particularly Commissioner Peach to listen to the audio file if you have it, because later in the discussion, a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, you commend the board members on their professionalism. But as I'll have accounted and will account, there were several problems with compliance with the Open Meetings Act. Also in the first news story, the county administrator refers to this item being handled by the textbook. Now I looked at the RCW, the orientation manual, AWC, WASAC. Doesn't sound to me like it was textbook. And then Commissioner McIntyre several times in the second article where he kind of defends himself in candidate forum the other day in the newspaper, there's a lot of hyperbole about this board is a model of openness and transparency. And we've done things by the book, and by the book is referenced over and over. And so far I haven't found that book that covers many of these, what I would say are possible violations, but possible. So later I'll request a copy of that textbook and that book, if I could have it. And then the second story at the Daily News that I submitted, there's again a couple of references to being strictly by the book. And then in the action taken, there's a cite to strictly by the book. And then there's allegations that were founded in nothing other, quote, a foul blast of partisan politics. So this is a citizen coming and reminding the board there could be violations of the Open Public Meetings Act. So I'm unclear whether that statement, which is recited twice on the audio file, by the way, relates to either the Open Public Meetings Act or possible violations of Conflict of Interest Act under the Code of Ethics. So I don't know, Commissioner McIntyre, somebody could clarify what that phrase references. If it's the reference on the conflicts, one could bring in the certificate of ownerships on the stock and show who owns that stock. So I'd be interested in that, to see, based on your statement the other day, and this statement in the Daily News, what that really means, this foul blast of partisan politics. And then at the end of the article is this reference to, I think this commission is a model of openness and transparency in all cases. Now, I started to compose a list to bring today, but obviously I'd be over my 3 minutes. So I'll submit that probably in the coming weeks of areas of board action that I don't think reflect open and transparent government, some of which have been in the media. So if it's possible, I'd like to just get a couple of things on the record as a request, and one would be a copy of the correspondence from the NR, and if I should submit a public records request, I'll do that. A copy of the correspondence from the timber company. Again, the textbook and the book that are recited as the better interpretation of the Open Public Meetings Act. And then some sort of a retraction of the statements in the second PDN article. Because the Daily News, it was kind of an insult to the public. I mean, their commissioner not getting notice of the meeting I referred to. The way the meeting was handled, the lack of a resolution, the action in the work session was never recorded in the minutes, and that's another statute, 4230 or 4220, somewhere in there. That action in the work session was never memorialized, and that's a state law. So there are various things like that I'll put together later. I just, again, didn't have time. And some apology, so to the media for not getting the notice, to myself for not getting the notice, and then this hyperbole that's in the second article, open, transparent government and partisan political politics or whatever. And then lastly, it's probably more important maybe to the prosecutor, but I'd like the board to notify the state auditor's office, do the investigation on this possible violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. I would like to participate in that investigation because I have a lot of things involved besides those I've mentioned today, but I'd like to pass those on to the state auditor's office. Thanks.
Okay, I was the one that called for the investigation, and I'm the primary one being investigated because I believe that the second commissioner had to have erred in the case. So since I'm being investigated, and I've asked for the investigation only on me and my actions, I would ask that Administrator Jones contact the state auditor and have them contact former Commissioner Doherty so he can put his complaints on the record as part of the investigation of my violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. The reason I say that I'm being investigated is clearly one commissioner has a right to send a letter. A second commissioner, which is me in that case, decided to also send a letter. Therefore, I violated the Open Public Meetings Act potentially. Certainly, at any time commissioners individually send letters, it was the second commissioner, in my opinion, that sent the letter that would have been a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. And if I remember right, it was Commissioner McIntyre who said he would send a letter, and I said I would send one too. That is the crux of whether that was a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. Certainly in the history of Clallam County government, there have been thousands of individual letters sent by commissioners. So clearly, one commissioner always has a right to send a letter. There would be a second commissioner who sends a corresponding letter that would then make it a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. That's what I believe should be investigated. Further details, further investigation, further information from Commissioner Doherty should be part of that record. I've also publicly stated that I would pay the fine, take my punishment if it's a violation. We've not heard from the state auditor, but it cannot be anything but the second commissioner who wrote a letter piggybacking the first commissioner's right to write a letter. That is the crux of what we're talking about here, and I take full responsibility for my actions, but certainly more information needs to be, have the auditor contact Commissioner Doherty.
Well, the state auditor will look into the matter and come to a conclusion, so that'll be that. Thank you. We are past 10:30, so we'll open the first of the two hearings. The first hearing involves a resolution adopting a budget emergency in the following fund: Health and Human Services Homelessness Task Force. And I would ask the county administrator to sit here.
Thank you. Pursuant to RCW 3640.140, after a public hearing on June 21st, the following constitutes a public emergency which could not reasonably have been foreseen at the time of budget preparation. And in this case, under Health and Human Services Homelessness Task Force, the ask is to transfer from the ending fund balance to professional services for contracted services to the homeless in response to request proposals of $300,000. The budget directors reviewed the accounting method for the debatable emergency and approved it by numbering and initialing the individual attached budget change form. So this request is not how to specifically use the money. It's important that people understand that. This simply gives the budget authority to expend the $300,000 that was not originally budgeted, therefore increasing the total appropriation of that fund. It does require a public hearing, and it does require the waiting of a period of 5 days after the public hearing to give time for anybody to challenge in Superior Court before the money can be awarded or reserved against. So at a later date, should the commission decide to increase the expenditure of the appropriation, at a later date, the recommendation would come from the Homelessness Task Force as to how they would suggest you spend that additional money. That is the basis of the budget emergency.
Okay. Questions from the board? All righty, we'll open the public hearing. There are 13 people that have signed up. First on the list is Sherry Tinker. Morning.
Good morning. I'm sorry, I'm really hoarse. My name is Sherry Tinker. I'm a social worker and director for North Olympic Regional Veterans Housing Network. We are a homeless veterans program out in Forks, but we have a building in Port Angeles and 2 now in Forks. This pot of money, I'm also co-chair of the Shelter Provider Network. This pot of money is very critical for our social service agencies within our region. We have all seen a shortfall within different philanthropies and state and federal monies, as I know the county is well aware from their own perspective. But this kind of money is set aside for this purpose, and we use it for all kinds of different things within our county. It helps to help a homeless veteran. It helps to get someone to get back on their feet that has lost their job. It's prevented someone from losing their housing if they are without funding for a short period of time, just need a little boost. All of the agencies that would be receiving this funding are all in critical need, including my nonprofit that I run. So we just hope that you support this pot of money for us. We greatly would appreciate it.
Thank you. Melinda Fowler, is that right? Morning.
I go by Mindy. My name is Mindy, and I wrote a letter. I'm just going to read it. Sure. I am a single mother of 3 amazing children. I live in the Cornerstone Apartments through Serenity House, and I'm writing to tell you how amazing Serenity House has been in my life and their employees. I met Kim Leach while participating in the Live Corps program back in 2010. I had developed a strong addiction problem, and I was struggling with being a parent, and I put my children in foster care, joined Live Corps, and lost everything. They wouldn't let me have my kids back because they didn't have any housing. And Kim Leach, she kind of made me her mission, you know, and she's been amazing. She got me into housing, and she kept on me. Sorry.
Okay.
It's a very emotional thing for me. I spent a lot of time trying and failing to get clean during that time. Kim never gave up on me, and she never let me feel alone. She encouraged me to do the things necessary to get housing so I could get my children back. She never scolded me when I slipped up. She only encouraged me to get back up and keep fighting. And since at that time my housing depended on having custody of my children, and having custody of my children depended on my housing, I was stuck for a while. It was very frustrating. Kim came up with the idea to get a notary saying that, a notarized statement from my ex-husband saying, if I got housing, I can have my kid. And then that worked out. I've been in this apartment since then. I've remained there. It's the most stable housing that me and my children have ever had. A few weeks after we moved in, my son and I pulled into the parking lot. He said, "We're home." And it was just the most amazing moment of my life right at that time, you know. And I still had to fight to get my daughters back. And Kim Leach and my housing specialists there through Serenity House, they all helped me out. They supported me. They kept me in line. They kept me on track. And I've had so many struggles, and they've just always been behind me and helped me through, and they've always been right next to me, you know, helping me. And in January of this year, I started the work-study program through the Peninsula College, and I was placed with Dream U in Serenity House, which is the youth program. And though I've had a lot of ups and downs, it turned out to be an amazing thing. I've done a lot of donations, and I've gotten a lot of donations and connections and things, and I bring these up because I came from being somebody with nothing and you know, broken and completely destroyed to somebody who's now helping people who are also, you know, and where I was. And that is huge, hugely thanks to Kim Leach and Serenity House employees and programs that help the homeless. And without these things, you know, I don't know where I would be. I don't know where my children would be, because I know I couldn't have done it on my own. I kind of veered from my letter a little bit. These programs are extremely important to our community because they also provide a lot of awareness for people about homelessness. Because when you think of homelessness, you don't necessarily think of a struggling mother with 3 kids. You know, I was at risk of losing my housing at one point, and Kim Leach personally went to my hearings with me and made sure that I remained in housing and I didn't lose my home. And it's people like her that are completely devoted to helping the homeless that keep this community together. So I'm beyond grateful for Serenity House. Thanks to them, my children and I have a home, a sense of security and stability. We are growing out of our apartment and we'll probably be moving out sometime in the near future, but my heart will forever be with Serenity House. I hope to someday work there so that I can further help youth, disabled veterans, and families just as Serenity House has helped us. I volunteer down there now because my work study has ended, and one of the greatest feelings is being able to encourage somebody and let them know that he's going to be okay, because I know for a fact that it will be, because it was for me.
Thank you, Mindy. Vida Ware.
Commissioner, can I remind them about plaque?
Yes, please. I was just going to do that. If I could ask, if you want to indicate your agreement with whatever is said, could you please either wave your hands or stand up or do something that doesn't make noise? Because when hand clapping or those kinds of things show up on the audio file, it kind of blows out Tricia's ears when she's trying to develop the minutes and the record of the hearing. So please do something nonverbal if you would, and that'll preserve Tricia's hearing. We don't want her to have any hearing loss. Vida Ware. Morning.
Morning. Vida Ware, 615 West 8th Street, apartment 7, Port Angeles. I am the program director of Coordinated Intake and Youth and Young Adult Services for Serenity House. I would like to read a section of a letter I received last week from a former client. I never thought of myself as being abused. It's amazing how many people from all walks of life and every social strata don't realize that they are in harm's way, because to admit that you are in it means you have to make a decision to get out of it. Oftentimes, we believe that it's better to stay where we are than to risk the unknown. I had this picture in my head of what people that needed funded services looked like and acted like. In my mind's eye, they looked hopeless, homeless, broken, with shattered dreams and tattered clothes, but they certainly didn't look like me. I was raised with my mother always saying, "There, but for the grace of God go I," whenever she saw someone homeless or in pain, and then I realized, that is me. The funding provided by Serenity House gave me the moment in time I needed to catch my breath and redirect my focus on caring for myself and my son, instead of catering to my abuser. You were there to help with my first month's rent, assisted with my monthly bills, and you even found my son a bed. Over time, you prompted me to channel my energies on kicking a path to a brighter existence. It was our discussions that led me to resume my education, which I'd left behind 30 years earlier. And it's that wisdom that has prompted me to tell anyone within listening distance to go back to school, face your fears, and keep moving forward, no matter how scary it may seem. If I hadn't told you before, and I sincerely hope that I have, you and Serenity House saved my life and quite possibly the life of my son. This former client is working full-time and supporting herself and her son without public assistance, while pursuing a business degree that she hopes to turn into a humanitarian business someday. Mainly, I would like to bring attention to the fact that the benefits of housing to our communities doesn't just stop at providing shelter. We have numerous clients across the board who are working and pursuing school and training, and this is just a sample of the kind of careers that they are looking at and aiming for. Addiction studies, social work, nursing, caregiving, early childhood education, green construction, cybersecurity. All of those give back in some way. Some of them are already working in these fields. Many people who receive help when they most desperately need it have a deep desire to do the same for others, and in this way, the giving can grow exponentially and in turn the benefits to their communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Martha Ireland.
Martha Ireland, I live at 20 Spath Road, Swim. Thank you, Commissioners Jim McIntyre, Mike Chapman, and Bill Peach, for taking seriously Clallam County's plan to end homelessness. Your willingness to invest general operating funds to help implement the 10-year plan on schedule, which that plan started in 2006, so it's supposed to be on schedule to end in 2016. Your willingness demonstrates that you're well acquainted with the progress being made in our county. The latest figures from the Department of Commerce show that Clallam County is one of only 10 out of the state's 39 counties that reduced the numbers of unsheltered people in 2015 as compared to 2014. That's not a percentage, this is numbers. And the numbers of people in Clallam County unsheltered was reduced by 31% in that last year. That's the fourth best result in the state. Some of those other 39 counties saw increases as much as 500% over the previous year. So clearly, even in the face of economic stress and rising poverty, Clallam County's homelessness response is working. To continue this success, you wisely and appropriately ask for proposals that carry out approaches that have proven successful rather than going off and embarking on some totally new strategies. Serenity House has responded with 3 applications in which I'll list what those were. It does occur to me, I didn't say, I work for Serenity House. I'm the executive coordinator, and so a big part of my job is writing grants. And I also am the coordinator for the Shelter Providers Network for Clallam County. And you gentlemen have appointed me to represent homelessness agencies on the homelessness task force. And so we submitted 3 applications. I know this hearing is not about those specifics, but just to run through them. The first one is for operating support for 24/7 residential emergency shelters that provide a step up out of homelessness. 24/7 residential shelter never closes. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year, there is no downtime on these. They are residential shelters. And very much a place, person who is literally homeless, whether they be single. We also have family shelters. This gives them a place to be while they work on something permanent. And the federal government has quit funding those, decided that was, they wanted to put all their money into permanent housing and none into shelters. So county support is absolutely essential for that. And we really see people, like individual might come in to the single adult shelter, be either man or woman. After a time there, they qualify that they can apply for a room and board bed. And now they have a place where they're paying somewhere between $100 and $200 a month. They have an assigned bed, they have an area, they're renting that. And they can stay there as long as they want. And most of them don't stay very long because, you know, they figure out when they can pay that one rent, next thing you know, they're figuring out that they're going out, they're getting jobs, they're working, they're finding better rentals, and they're becoming contributing members of the community. Really a step out of homelessness. Our second application is for supportive services to stabilize and equip clients to overcome homelessness. This award will help restore case management and site supervision and services that are essential to client success and also to satisfy, to support the safety of the community and the serenity of the community. These are programs that deal with the hardest to help people. The people who Bill Benedict's crew and the city police officers are well acquainted with. And they get into stable housing, and with proper support, they become much less disruptive in the community, much less expensive to the community, and their lives improve. Really a win for everyone involved. Our third application is for a little money to help with the program that Viola Ware directs, the county-wide coordinated intake, assessment, and placement services, which we carry out through our housing resource centers, which are located in Port Angeles, Squim, and Forks, so that the person in your home community, Bill, and Jim's whole community, as well as in Mike's, if they're in a housing crisis, they have a place where they can walk in and get help. And in all cases, these funds will be used efficiently and effectively to prevent and end homelessness for residents of Clallam County and help those people to build self-reliance and a better community for all. I thank you again for your support.
Thank you. Cindy Hewitt.
Good morning. Cindy Hewitt, Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity of Clallam County, and Colleen Robinson and Rachel Shenfield, and we are Habitat. And we also are very active in the Shelter Providers Network, partnering with many of the organizations here today, and ask for your continued support of these funds to help us in all the work that we do here in Clallam County. I'm not going to repeat what we have put in our written grant to you. I just want to share a couple new things with you, though, that Habitat is doing and why we need this continued support. We are not a federally funded organization. We are part of Habitat for Humanity International, and it's in 70 countries now doing the work, having served over 1 million families worldwide. We are building, of course, here in Port Angeles and in Forks, and we have a land bank to build 15 more homes in these two towns over the next few years. New builds, new construction, serving not just one family at a time, because you look at the impact we have that reaches into those families, that takes them out of poverty, that puts them onto a pathway out of poverty into success, graduating from high school, going on to college, becoming homeowners themselves, and seeing their parents support them in that work going forward. Something new that you're going to see from Habitat for Humanity Clallam County in this next year that we're promoting to our city entities from SWIM to Forks is neighborhood revitalization. So our impact's going to be greater. We're going to go and start in communities and work with a lot from the Shelter Providers Network, with churches, with schools, with our city entities, and do things like rehabbing a home ownership, low-income families that can't do a paint fix-up on the exterior, maybe need new landscaping or fencing, perhaps critical repair of their homes, and aging in place, helping seniors that can't afford to fix their homes but need a little assistance that way, as well as weatherization. So that is a new initiative that Habitat is doing all throughout the United States, and we're proud to be launching that. We just also received a grant recently from a Rotary Club in SWIM to help with NR in that town. So we're working here with Nathan West in Port Angeles and also with Rod in Forks to do NR work in those towns. So you're going to see our impact just growing and growing and growing. So I ask for your continued support. As was said earlier, fundraising is a challenge. There are a lot of nonprofits here in Clallam County all doing wonderful work, and so is Habitat. And I just ask you to keep those in the forefront as well. Thank you.
Mary Hogan.
Good morning.
Mary.
I'm Mary Hogan. I'm the Executive Director for the Volunteers in Medicine of the Olympics Medical and Dental Clinic. And I can't tell you how important these funds are to our community, to VMO. We are offering dental care to a population that is discarded, misunderstood. All of us need help at some point in our life, and that's what we're proposing to do. These funds would allow us to have dental staff on at the clinic once a week so that we can have help with emergency care, urgent care, chronic care. Oral health is extremely important to your overall health. We know that a lot of our homeless have not ever had dental care. It's hard to get a job when you don't have any teeth. That's the first impression you make on an employer. We have partnered with OLICAP, and with the funds from OLICAP and the funds from this grant coming up, we would be able to help with denture. We'd be able to help with more restorations. We would be able to refer patients out to the local dentists that need help beyond what we do in our clinic, and get them back into the community, being able to work and be a contributing part of our community. And I want to introduce Susan Guile, who's our dental coordinator, and have her say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk about what happened. We tend to forget that our teeth are part of our bodies. It's part of our mind. If we don't have a good sense of how we feel and how we look, it's very hard for us to present something positive to a potential employer or even somebody who's trying to find housing. So between infection and self-esteem, dental plays a mental role and a physical role in someone's well-being. And with this money, we have the opportunity to give that to the folks that don't have regular dental care. We want to be able to provide reconstructive. So not just pulling a tooth, not just filling one tooth, but actually restoring a whole mouth so that they are healthier and become a more productive part of our society. And this money will give us the opportunity to hire that dentist to be there on a regular basis so we can do continuing care instead of just short-term emergent care. Thank you.
Susan, you were next on the list, so
I just kind of
check you off. Thank you. Jeff? I'm surely going to mispronounce this. Gazbach?
He was with us.
Okay.
So you can just mark him off.
Okay, great. Thank you. Boy, this is going to be a tough one. It looks like Pam Reach.
It's probably me, Kim.
Okay, I'm sorry. There you go. Sorry about that, couldn't read it.
That's okay, I was in a hurry.
And that is you, Kim, not Pam or Ben or anything.
Well, I am Kim Leach, Executive Director for Serenity House, and I've come here before a few different times to talk about what's happening with Serenity House and kind of where we're at. Today what I really want to say is that I do believe that what you guys have decided to do with the money is an honorable thing. To take $300,000 to put back into the county to address homelessness and the services that people receive in order to either not be homeless, to get into shelter when they are homeless, to be part of a long-term permanent housing program when they need extra support in order to maintain housing. These are all great services. People do need dental care. People need emergency domestic violence shelter and the kinds of care that they can. So all of the applicants that have applied for the money are very valid applicants. And so I know that you guys have a tough choice. I had a man that I grew up with, I found out this weekend that he died living along a river. And so what I found out was that he had been homeless for over 9 years, living on the street. And so he didn't want to go into the shelter to sleep. That was his choice. The newspaper articles talked about that. They talked about how funny he was. They talked about the fact that he would come into the shelter once in a while to access food or to access case managers for conversation or resources if he needed them. But otherwise, he slept outside. And what I thought was that in that part of the country, their services are extremely nil. There's emergency shelters. They're starting to come around with some family programs and things like that, but they're very far behind. And Clallam County is so fortunate to be able to have a county-wide network of folks that believe in taking care of its less fortunate inhabitants. And I think that I feel fortunate to be part of that group. Serenity House is recovering financially. We still have a long ways to go. We are focused on the sustainability plan, which means reducing debt. We definitely need to reduce debt. Most of our debt is tied up in properties that contain housing programs or the businesses that support the programs that we do have. And so we have options. They're somewhat complicated. And so we're trying to next, once that initial crisis is over, next we're looking at how can we manipulate what we do have in order to put that back into the agency in a way that helps it sustain financially so that we can continue services. So we don't want to reduce our services if we don't have to. The agency's not going to go under if we have to reduce services and close down housing programs or something like that. We would if we had to, but we don't want to. And even though might sound a little glib, I guess, but to me it's just about what is it? You guys have the hardest choice to decide where to put that money in order to what really makes sense for the good of the whole county. And so I just, want to say that I do realize that, and I hope that you do think about the folks in the different shelters across the county and people that need some more of that very basic care. Now, there's not homeless or struggling with housing.
Thank you. Becca Corby.
Hello, I'm Becca Corby. I'm Executive Director of Health and Families of Clallam County, serving victims of
abuse and child abuse. So my colleagues have done a really great job about talking about services and provision of services potential funding would go for, and so I'm grateful for that, because then I can talk about something a little nastier. First of all, I would like to thank you for the decision to release the funding. This is, the intent, as I understood it, was to help offset shortfalls that our community does have to address right now. This is short term. We've been told numerous times, this is one time, this is one time, this is one time, this is one time. We get it, it's one time. And for that, we're very grateful. The needs that it's addressing are huge. It's not just need a place to stay. It's not just need some clothing. It's not just need some food. These are basic needs that every single one of us needs to survive. They are us. That's all there is to it. And forgive me if I sound a little preachy. I'm a daughter of a preacher, so I want to stay away from that. But it is also very, very difficult as a grant writer for me, and I can't speak for my colleagues, but I can guess it's the same for them. It's very difficult when we write a grant to someone, say Murdoch or Gates or National Children's Alliance, big, 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 big organizations, and they ask the question, well, what is your local government support? How can I word that? You're part of the problem, and you are part of the solution. That's just, unfortunately, a fact. Not just you as individuals. Local government leaders all over this country can be a huge part of the solution. There is a collective responsibility here that many of us in our community are not aware we are responsible for. There is a great deal of violence in this community, in this county. There's a great deal of homelessness in this county. My little teeny tiny agency sheltered over 8,500 bed nights last fiscal year. That's up 1,000 bed nights from the previous year. That's not getting better. I think in many ways our coordinated response is unbelievable. It's hard to match it throughout the state. But we have to find the core of the problem. We don't have living wage jobs. It's great. You have somebody, trained at Peninsula College to become a chemical dependency counselor. Where are they going to go work for a living wage? They learn to program computers. Where are they going to work for a living wage? You've got teenagers who can't get jobs in the summer because the moms and dads are working at Frugal's and McDonald's and Wendy's. We as a community have to come up with the understanding of what the core problem is. Agencies like mine, I can't speak for the other agencies, but I think it's probably fairly close. About 90% of the money that comes into our agency, and we have a $650,000 budget at mine, the majority of which I go elsewhere and find. It doesn't come from local government. I have to go elsewhere and find it. And that's fine. That's part of my job. About 90% of that stays in this community. It's recycled in this community. Those dollars are taxed over and over and over again for this community. And that is something that's very serious that needs to be looked at. We are entities to be dealt with. We are businesses. We're not just social service, kumbaya, woo-woo, let's hold hands and get a Kleenex out. That's a wet Band-Aid on a wet leg. There are some of us who are hardcore down and dirty activists. And I have the utmost respect for those of you sitting up there and the city council members and the Sequim city council members. But you have to be part of the solution, ongoing, big picture. Even our Centers for Disease Control recognize homelessness and violence as health issues in communities. The more homeless and violent you have in a community, the sicker a community is. And this is a sick community. The solution to the problem, and I'm almost done, I promise not to preach like my dad did. Solution to the problem begins by creating a culture of intolerance. Now, we've been sold a bill of goods, we've got to be tolerant of everything. I'm talking intolerance to the stuff that really matters. Intolerance to inequality. Intolerance to people sitting on the bench who are not holding perpetrators accountable. Intolerance for people who sit on the bench who are not putting bail on a rapist's head. but instead letting that person go. Intolerance for people who are part of the problem creating homelessness by paying crappy wages. Intolerance for those who are in the community development business who are not bringing non-toxic employment into this place. Not another Walmart. Dear God, please, not another Walmart. Something that counts, that's part of the picture postcard we live in. We need a clearer understanding of the hopelessness of homelessness. When you are hopeless, you can't get out of bed. I have not, in my 12 years of doing this, met one person who wants to be on welfare. Not one. I've met a lot of people who don't want to work, but not who wants to be on welfare. We need to begin with the ability of every human being having the opportunity to make the choice to live autonomously. They want to be homeless in the forest, well, let's make sure they got a good tent. I'd like to go live in the forest, to tell you the truth. I'm sick of people. They have the right to live peacefully. We have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not of happiness, but to pursue it. And we, as a community, are creating barriers ourselves. And it's time for every single one of you as leaders and community development people to look at this through a new lens, which is, are we part of the problem or part of the solution? And what do we need to do collectively to make that happen? You are surrounded by a collective group of people who work really well together, who talk really well together, who can gripe to each other if we have to, if they have the courage to do that. In order to do that, each individual needs to have access to safe, affordable housing that is sustainable. And sustainable means green stuff, money. It's about money. Everything's about money. $300,000 is huge. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is a drop in the bucket in the big scheme of life. It is a drop in the bucket. It is a temporary fix. Again, thank you, thank you, thank you, because we need it. And you all know why. We need to get people through the coldest, wettest time this year. And I'm going to ask, since the money was not released when it was supposed to be, would you please extend that to the end of April rather than to the end of March, if you put that in your pipes and smoke it. What this means is it means growth and change. And I'm not from this community, and I happen to, really like change, and I really like growth, but a lot of people are really afraid of it. I'm asking you guys, I am appealing to you to be brave, be bold, be true, and let this community, make this community grow in the way it has to grow. Everybody needs a wake-up call. That means community development that has an interest of the whole at heart, not a select few. That means creating an environment that nurtures entrepreneurship. America is not America because people all worked for the county, or the state, or the city, or Walmart. This country was built on regular Joes. That means creating an environment that recognizes that the people that we serve are not stupid. They're not just lazy. They're not just drug addicts. They're us. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Jody Moss.
Hi, I'm Jody Moss. I'm the Executive Director of United Way of Clallam County. I reside at 73 Ridge Lane outside of Port Angeles. And I would repeat everything that everyone else has said, but also to talk a little bit about thinking about these funds and continuing to think about at least a portion of funds as investing in economic development, because when you are homeless, when your children are homeless, they don't do well in school, you have a hard time going out and maintaining a job, even getting one. When your children are homeless and don't do well in school, then there's a cycle that gets repeated. There's data on individuals who are addicted and homeless that they will cost a community $500,000 each every year, and you repeat that over and over again. That's in cost of emergency room visits, cost of jail, cost of police interventions, cost of other free clinic services, shelter services that sort of do that repeat piece. I think one of the benefits of investing in this community and in these kinds of health and human service funds is that you're investing in a group that really works well together, that looks at best practices in using these funds, and that has created an infrastructure for using these funds. And I would encourage you to consider that, not just this one time, but perhaps consider opening up those human service funds again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin Shaughnessy.
Good morning, my name is Martin Shaughnessy. I'm an advocate, full-time volunteer, and board member at Taffy Answer for Youth. I'm also very active in the Port Angeles Citizens Action Network. I'd like to talk a little bit today about drug abuse in our community. And despite rosy scenarios of the reduction of homelessness and how much better things are getting, it seems to me that we're about the only growth industry in the county. We seem to be picking up business all the time. On an average night, we serve about 40 individuals, most of whom are still active drug addicts, some of whom are beginning stages of recovery. By the end of the month, that number swells to about 80 people. We do this 4 nights a week, so we're serving thousands of people during the course of the year. I think the last time that I saw you, Mr. McIntyre, was at the 4th of July parade. I was right behind the Clallam County Republican float with my 1923 Dodge Brothers Roadster and a cute little chubby 4-year-old in a tiara waving her little American flag. A lot of people assume that that kid is my granddaughter. She's not. She's a Taffy kid. Her parents were both on the street. Her parents were both drug addicts. They are both now productive members of our community. They're both employed. And I spend a lot of time with little Ava, moving her around from daycare to Bible school, because her parents are at work. Now, I can give you examples of dozens of people that we've helped from street level. I'm talking about ground zero here. I'm talking about people who are sticking needles in their arms over behind swings that we've helped out of that kind of darkness and back into productive lives here in our community. Now, as I'm looking at the disbursement recommendations for these grants, I find that this county values that at 0. Nothing. Zip. Nada for this effort. However, what I find in here is that the lion's share of this money is going to go to one place. And when it was stated that there was $300,000 available, this particular group asked for $250,000 of that $300,000. It looks to me from the numbers that I have in front of me that they will be awarded about 1/3 of that grant. Now, when I attended the bidders conference at the beginning of this, I received an email that said that attendance at the bidders conference was mandatory. I saw no representatives of this particular group at that conference, and I'd like to know, what does mandatory mean? Does mandatory mean unless you're a friend of ours? Does mandatory mean, well, except for you guys? We heard a little bit of talk so far today about transparency and fairness and procedure, and I'm just wondering, where does any of that enter into these decisions? Now, I don't just represent Taffy. I'm a private citizen. I grew up here in Port Angeles, graduating class in 1975. Happy 40th reunion this year. I hear all kinds of things like these people are being trucked in, yet I recognize those last names. They were the dirty, unpopular kids that I went to high school with, and I have their grandkids. We don't just have an epidemic of drug use in Port Angeles. We have an epidemic of neglect. We have an epidemic of abuse. We have an epidemic of widespread poverty and hopelessness based on economic factors as well as social factors. And what we strive to do at Taffy is help to alleviate that a little bit at a time. We don't own millions of dollars worth of real estate. We don't have company cars, and we don't have salaried employees. We have nothing but volunteers I think our director receives a stipend of about $500 a month, and by my observation, that would work out to about 85 cents an hour. What we do is simply accept these people as they are. If they're not showing themselves to be an immediate threat to themselves or somebody else, they're in. We'll feed them. We'll shower them. We'll supply them with hygiene supplies. We supply them with free clothing. We don't sell clothing to them. But more than that, as people move into this early critical stage of recovery, and when you talk to people who are addicted and they talk about the support that they receive from their family, the support that they receive from their community, let's keep in mind that my people live in the bushes. They don't receive that kind of support. So when they start into that very, very critical phase, I'm there. I'm not in an office somewhere. I drive these people to job interviews. I drive them to rehab. I drive them to meetings. I'm there with them all the time. I've been in the trailer courts. I've been in the homeless camps. And for me to sit here and listen about how things are improving, it is kind of ironic. They're not. You know, we're stuck right here. Now this group, this isn't any criticism of any other group, because this group is very unique. They will always be at the very bottom of the services ladder. They're not cute. They're not plucky. Some of them don't care whether they're homeless or not. And yet, there's a group here, it seems to me, to believe that this is their decision. They've made these decisions. They've made bad choices. Most of the kids that I deal with, most of the young people that I deal with, we go all the way to age 35 there. The bad choices they made were who they picked for parents. The bad choices they made was where they choose to live. These kids are absolutely defenseless, homeless, hopeless. And what we got for them today? Zero. Nothing. Zip. So I'm not really expecting that to change. In fact, I advocated at the time when we were talking about this parent to not even bother. But I'm here today just because I'm looking at these numbers and I'm wondering about these anomalies. I'm wondering about this transparency. I'm wondering about this fairness. And I'm wondering if this is what we have to expect. You know, should I just go ahead and do something else? I could have been in a trailer park that day. I could have been driving somebody to daycare or to a job interview. Instead, apparently, I wasted my time in this bidding process. And really, that's about all I have to say here. I'm not running for anything. You know, I'm not advocating for anything. I'm just very disappointed. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda Middleton.
Hi. There you are. I'm Linda Middleton. This is Lambros Rogers. And we have managed a representative payee program for over 25 years from concerned citizens. We're very connected to service providers in every community on the Olympic Peninsula. And I really want to thank you for your foresight in looking at social service agencies as recipients of these funds. That's very commendable. For years, we have kept people in their homes by managing their budgets and helping them budget their money. And we never really thought of that as a homeless agency or that we were working on homelessness. We just were keeping them in their homes. So it's kind of been kind of a little shift for us to think of ourselves even that way. But in a meeting that I was in Forks just last week, there was an estimated 150 people who are homeless just in the West End. I mean, it's amazing when you go to these meetings and you listen to everything that everybody is doing and how everything all ties together. These people, like we've heard, are not readily seen. They don't want to draw attention to themselves, but they're there. In the summer, it's not so bad, but living in a tent under a bridge, you know, I mean, we camp, I get it, but in the winter, I cannot even imagine in the windy, rainy Forks how bad that can be. So we work hard to keep people in their homes by working with landlords, building relationships, and collaborating with other agencies, as you've heard other people talk about. I'm not going to elaborate on that. Most of the people we work with have many challenges. A lot of them are on drugs or have mental health issues. We do a lot of mental health people and people with disabilities. They often just need someone to call on, someone to advise them of whatever issue they're having that day, somebody on the other end of the phone to just talk to them, and someone to be able to just talk to. But all that takes time and money, but it keeps them in their home. It's worth it when they can stay in their homes, and we always go the extra mile. Last July, we became the only representative payee. I'm going to let Lambros talk about some of the stuff that we've assisted with, but in the information that they just gave me, we've assisted 7 homelessness clients just in this year. 5 more will be housed by the end of the year, they anticipate, and that's without any extra funding. So I think we can use this funding very well, and I want to thank you for that. We want to do more than balance people's checkbooks and help them budget their money. We want to allow them the common decency to live in a house with running water, electricity, and not have to wonder where they'll be at the end of every day. Imagine how that would feel. I can't imagine sleeping out with no locked door, no safety of any kind. So, Bruce, do you want to say anything?
Just really quick, I'd also like to say thank you for considering us. With our clients, some of the homelessness is drugs. It is a big problem, but our clients also have issues with maintaining homes because they all have either mental or physical disabilities. And the physical disability, you can see that. And the people that work with them can see that. But it's the mental disabilities that a lot of the places that they choose to stay at, the people that run them don't really understand. So we kind of act as a conduit to try to allow more knowledge and understanding of our clients that are renting maybe through renting a room from someone that hasn't ever rented or dealt with someone with mental disabilities. So we're not just trying to prevent homelessness, we're also trying to prevent people that have homes from losing those homes and becoming part of the problem. So it's kind of a two-pronged effect that we're trying to create.
So thank you. And thanks for considering us.
That's the people that signed up. Is there anyone else that would like to provide some comments before we close the hearing?
Everyone on the board, taxpayers, and first of all, I want to tell you, my heart goes out to every one of you who have dedicated your lives to helping these people who are really in need. As part of my misspent youth, I was a case manager for homeless veterans, and so I do have a soft spot in my heart for the homeless and all those people that are near homeless. One thing that keeps echoing back in my mind as I listen to all of these tales go out this morning, and that is the gimmick that you guys played a couple of months ago, reducing the sales tax by some indecipherable percentage, and the $750,000 that you're leaving into the community would have been double what you're talking about spreading out to all these worthy organizations this morning. So I guess my first request would be to pull back that gimmick and go ahead and dedicate that, what is it, $20 per thousand to these organizations so that you can triple, quadruple the offering that you can give these people. And let's be clear about this. The only people who benefited from that gimmick are the new car dealers. I don't think anybody in this room or anybody that these people serve are going to notice that 20 cents out of every $100 that they're going to save because of this alleged tax rate. And secondly, working with homeless, one of the things that they teach you, if you haven't already learned it somewhere else, is to be careful about enabling people that have bad habits, because if you make things easier for them, then they will continue their bad habits. And I don't believe that there's anybody in this room or probably anywhere that I know of where they would figure that having a homeless agency that amasses $7.5 million in real estate is actually meeting their mission. And when you keep pouring money at an organization that is already handling or holding $7.5 million in assets, which they could liquidate and put into their mission, you're not doing them any good. You're just continuing that bad decision making. So I'm going to urge you two things. Bring back the 0.2% or whatever it was, and bring that $750,000 back to this group of people that you've heard from this morning. And secondly, when you make these grants, I'm going to go out for Taffy here. Taffy is meeting them where they most need to be met. They're meeting them right at the edge of the woods. That's where I was. They're meeting them with hope, with caring, and with a way forward that they're not going to go too far looking for at the state that they're in when they're just coming out of the woods. So, it's a big vote from Taffy, and a big vote for another $750,000 that you took. Thank you.
Dale, did we get your name and address?
My apologies. Dale Wilson, P.O. Box 817, Port Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? What's the pleasure of the commission? The board? As far as closing the hearing goes. Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Pleasure of the board regarding the resolution. Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Alrighty. And the second hearing is the 2015 mid-year budget review. Administrator Jones, that's your show. So.
Can you watch this just a second?
Yes, thank you. As required by the Clallam County Charter, the administrator is asked to appear at a public hearing and give essentially a state of the county as of the mid-year point, 6/30 of each year, June 30th, and make a projection as to where the budget looks like it's going for next year. This is, or for the balance of the year. And this is the start of the formal budget process for 2016. Even though it's just a recap of 2015 data. So, as is my charge, I'd like to read into the record the executive summary, the agenda item summary that accompanies the spreadsheet that you all have, and that was out on our website for people to look at. And this effort was our budget director, Debbie Cook, and she's here with us today, and my collaborative work involved, waiting for obviously it took a long time because we had to wait for the legislature to get done, because so much of what the second half of the year in many of our departments was dependent on money, revenue coming forward, and so that happened, and we had to kind of wait for that. But here is the executive summary. The 2015 mid-year budget status review is projecting year-end general fund revenues of $33,782,890 and expenditures of $33,994,933, using reserves of $212,043. These projections are significantly better than the use of $758,395 in general fund reserves that was originally budgeted. Most of the positive change was on the revenue side of the equation, as the local economy is performing better than expected, bringing us sizable increases in sales tax despite the 2/10 reduction, construction permits, camping fees, as well as better investment interest and jail fees, which more than offset the increases in salaries and benefits due to switching from 37.5 hours a week to 40 hours a week starting May 1st, and the use of one-time reserve balances for several projects and services designed to help jumpstart the local economy. On balance, I believe the projection is reliable for the rest of this year and is looking pretty good for next year, as the state legislature was able to balance their budgets without the significant cuts that were warned about because of the improving economy throughout the state. Other revenues and expenditures appear to be pretty much as expected and within budget, with the notable exception of the road department, which had some very large project expenditures and reimbursable revenues carry over from 2014, which inflates both sides of the equation but is neutral to reserves, and a big reduction in expenditures and reimbursable revenues for the Carlsberg Sewer Project, as it now appears that the majority of those project expenditures will move into the 2016 budget year. And one thing I'd like to add is that, in response to several people's questions, not one dime of any money reserved for the Carlsberg Sewer Project is going to be used for any other purpose. It will just be delayed until 2016 and beyond. So that is the executive summary. I'm here, Debbie Cook and I, our budget director, are here to answer any questions that you might have. And that's my report.
Questions from the board? Just wanted to confirm, Jim, this is a build-up of a forecast looking at every single cost center. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We went through one by one on every single revenue, every single expenditure item, and made projections based on where we were and comparative history of the last 9 years of where each of those line items was at the mid-year of those years and where they ended up. Use that as a comparison, as well as taking into consideration the things that Debbie and I believe are going to yet to happen during this year. So it's a combination of all of that work that kind of gets put together and results in this projection.
We'll open the hearing. And the only person who has signed up is Mike Doherty. Mike?
Thank you. So my name is Mike Doherty, I live at 617 South E, Port Angeles. And I just have a general concern, and that is for decades I've watched the budget development adoption process, and it's changed a lot in the last 6 months. It used to be very predictable for citizens, elected officials, employees, junior taxing districts to look at the county's budget system and have a predictable number of meetings and communities, preliminary budget, all of the things that happened. But in the last 6 months, that changed very dramatically, not just the outcome, but the process. And that should be a concern, I think, to the board, because in the long run, if you want the public to trust the board, you can't change those major rules. So the big spending items, the big revenue items have changed a lot in just 6 months after decades of a very statutory process, and in this county, a very traditional process that people could believe would be very similar year after year. But in 6 months, it's a dramatic change. So when Becca Corbin mentioned the grantsmanship, that canceled some of my comments, but I was going to mention, just over my short term as a Board of Commissioner member, there were a lot of grants that when people would ask, and it was personal lobbying at times, one, I remember Governor Locke on the OpScan project. We were on the verge 2 times after we passed 2 major hurdles to lose that, I think it was $6-point-something million. He went to bat for us after a personal conversation about the stability of Clallam County finances, because he knew there would be changes in some of the infrastructure costs if we got that large chunk of money. And he didn't want that grant to blow up in his face. So he personally got involved in lobbying against the recommending screening groups to say Clallam County earned this. When the LWA project was being finished, we were, I think, $2 million short, something like that, Jim, at the time. And we didn't want to borrow the money. But down in Olympia, in 2 or 3 meetings, Craig Jacobs, Lynn Kessler, others, myself, could make the case that we had the money. We could have gone to Treasurer's O&M or other funds, but we had some money to make that up, and it would really damage the financial stability of Clallam County, and we had a great record. The state went to bat for us. We got $2 million. We didn't have to borrow money for the largest construction project in the history of Clallam County. This building was $10.8 million, something like that, paid for cash, built on time. Unusual large projects for a relatively small county to come out ahead financially. Most of the counties, Jim knows, would have bonded for these kinds of projects over 20 years or more. So there's a great benefit in keeping strong reserves, contingency funds, revenue flowing dependably, and the county, I'm afraid, is just getting away from that because of these last 6 months or so activities. It's particularly difficult if you're a manager in the county or an elected official, and you're looking at this change in process, but also spending down of some of these sources of revenue that you may be hoping to tap responsibly for your mission under the state statutes. There is, just quickly, a scenario happening in parts of the United States where some interest groups, and for lack of a better word, kind of the Tea Party folks, want to spend down government reserves, particularly at the local and state level, contingency funds, those types of sources of money, create a crisis, and then some are selling off the Commonwealth, public parks, closing libraries, all of those things. And there are some very powerful interest groups that want that to happen, and they're supporting that kind of a mentality. At the end of the day, the public has less of the Commonwealth, has less of basic infrastructure, and less, enjoyment, like county parks. And in our county, we have the luxury of federal parks, state parks, and 19, 20 assets in the county park system. And I was a little chagrined, but I hope Bill has been educated a bit. I remember in Forks, when Bill suggested closing the budget gap, Commissioner Peach suggested closing the budget gap by closing county parks. Now, at least 2, maybe 3 of the parks make more money than they cost, and some are very little maintenance cost, but they mean big things to average folks. And at the end of the day, that's kind of partially what the county stands for. County Parks in our county is the longest operating park board and park system in the state of Washington. 1937, 38, when the Thompsons donated near Thompson Point on Lake Crescent, Camp David Jr. From that day on, it's a great park system. Thousands of people enjoy that. And again, 2 or 3 of those parks generate extra revenue for Clallam County. So I'm hoping that the board would reevaluate some of the last 6 months and some of the trends that are still continuing about this spending frenzy and take the longer view, because as Becca mentioned, and just thinking ahead in your own life, as I did in my legacy on some of these things, you're going to need some matching funds. You're going to leverage money to get more money from the outside, which if it's local taxpayers' money going to the state, going to the federal government, you're going to try to leverage to get some of that back in Clallam County. If you don't have a reserve, you don't have a little more flexibility left, you won't be able to leverage the money and use the matching funds. There are luxuries along the way when you can afford it, like the park system. So you've got to look ahead to keep the structure there, so even in the tough times, you don't have to close the parks, not gain parks when it's a critical time. If you look at the comprehensive plan, I think still ranked very high. The citizens you serve want more public access on the saltwater. And one of the things I've been reminded of 4 or 5 times during my term of office, I was the lead commissioner on, I think, 5 public saltwater access parks. I never thought about it until people have reminded me of that. So there were times when we had some extra money. We had maybe a willing seller. We had an agency like the port in the case of Dungeness Landing who wanted to get rid of an asset, and we could pick it up. It's more in line with the county's mission. So a lot of this, again, relates back to the whole budget process. Jim, you said you're going to start it again. It should be very predictable, and a lot of these big revenue, big spending decisions should be handled in that public process. Now, the board has been discussing having less public process, fewer public hearings. To me, I would want you to err the other way and have more public hearings, meetings, process, and get the public to trust you more when you're using tax money on these sorts of things, even like county park systems. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yeah, Jim, so what are you projecting for the general fund reserve at the end of the year?
At this point, we're projecting that we'll have, I don't have the exact number in front of me now, and I was just looking for it, but somewhere in the neighborhood of $11.5 to $12 million.
And what you project coming into the year?
About 11 even.
That's just a terrible spending program. I'm sorry. I can't help myself. you might want to be a little more educated before you rip the board as a former commissioner. I don't think in 6 months to go from an $11 million projected reserve to 11.5 is anything but the most responsible actions. And your comments today, Commissioner, disgust me, quite frankly. So, you know, to come here and rip us somehow 6 months, just the whole house of county government's just gone to hell in a handbasket, according to you, is the height of your responsibility. You want to attack us for, and the other thing, sorry, excuse me? At least come to a regular meeting where you would say this should be a public hearing, but to criticize us in a public hearing for reducing public hearings on a day when we called for 2 public hearings that we probably don't even have to hold. Unbelievable. I get you don't like us. I get none of us have the special D after our name. And somehow, now that you've left, county government's going to hell in a handbasket. But you know what? Today, we put $300,000 back into the community to help those that are in need. We also help the average taxpayer reduce the burden. And if you look around, this community is taxed to death. So we reduced a tiny little bit. I will grant you that. Again, not the height of your responsibility. And finally, unbelievably, we're going to have a larger reserve projected at the end of this year while we help our employees go to 40 hours. I suppose that would be the height of your responsibility for you to take your employees to 40 hours a week. While we're trying to help the city of Port Angeles finish a wonderful waterfront project, I suppose in your world, that would be the height of your responsibility. While we're working with the Port of Port Angeles to find federal and state matching grants that I believe you yourself advocated for, there are letters with your name on it. That would be the height of your responsibility. What else would be the height of your responsibility in your world now that none of us have the right letter after our name? You can come here anytime you want and rip us to shreds, and I'm going to rip you back because you're out of bounds. You can come and come and level a open public meetings act violation every week until I leave office. You yourself have written dozens and dozens of letters as an individual commissioner. You, Commissioner Theringer, myself, signed a letter in favor of Wild Olympics, never putting it on the agenda until we were called and had to add it months later. So for you to come in here and criticize me for sending a second letter as an individual commissioner, when the record would show that you yourself have sent hundreds that I personally had no knowledge of, is unbelievable to me. You should find other things. You could find lots of other things to criticize me about. But things that you did, you yourself sent letters and never once alerted me. Dozens and dozens of times people would show me letters you wrote. Did I one time in any of my time in office question you publicly on that? No. Because you know what? I didn't really care what letters you wrote, and I didn't see that it was my business. But now that you've left, on a meeting that you missed for a valid reason, nobody criticized that. And when I simply said, you know, Commissioner McIntyre, it's a good idea, maybe I'll write a letter too, to come back and have this faux report from the state auditor wasting everybody's time. And you know what? Fine, I'll be guilty of sending a second letter. But your hypocrisy, to quote a character from one of my favorite movies, your hypocrisy knows no bounds. Your hypocrisy knows no bounds. To criticize me for sending a letter when my record of letters would be 1/10 your letter. To criticize this board for actions that you yourself took while in office, I'm sorry. Though I try to respect your legacy, though I think you've been a fine public service, find other things to criticize us because they're there. You're better than that. Find better issues than things you did yourself.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
So I hope other well-meaning citizens come to the board with a plea about just process. That's my open meeting thing. The conflict of interest issue, I think, is very serious. If you read the county ethics ordinance, you would see there's a duty to report those things. A duty. It's not discretionary.
How come you didn't show the board letters you wrote over the years? Why is it now an issue?
Because it wasn't a majority of the board taking a position.
Olympics?
When, as I understand, and that was pointed out by the same company that is involved in this other issue.
Somehow, when we signed a letter for Wild Olympics without ever putting it on the agenda, 3 board members signed that. Somehow that was okay?
No, not at all. And we had a discussion to change that right away, and we decided we would change it right away. I'm saying this board should take accountability, responsibility, and some behavior change too.
I think we have.
But regardless, so just give me 1 minute, Mike, without interrupting. So if the Clallam Bay sewer system with the 2 treatment plants, stovepiping in particularly the CQ area, became an emergency, and you could leverage county money to combine state parks at Cowan, the prison, the treatment plant at Clallam Bay into a first-class treatment plant, and you had some decent reserves, that would be a great project. A couple decades, the board had a gentleman's agreement that
11.5 plus the reserves in the opportunity fund?
Well, you need, what, 3 or 4 just to operate. So you deduct that out.
Opportunity fund?
So, can I just finish, and I'll go away? Okay?
No, you won't.
I promise.
No, you won't.
If you want me to go, okay.
No, I'd like it to be fair.
So as an example, Clallam Bay sewer is an upcoming expense. I think Kim thinks he can stretch another maybe 6, 7 years unless something major falls apart. So that's one issue.
We have the money set aside. You know that. That's what you're not being fair. That money didn't go away in 6 months. It's still sitting there. How, with a straight face, can you say that money disappeared? Where did it go?
Mike, the opportunity fund will grow, but there'll be other emergencies. And again, for years, for decades, the county current expense fund, the county road fund, the opportunity fund tended to be county-centric more for services. The opportunity fund is more community-wide. But as you know, the county has less revenue sources, fewer less revenue sources going in the future than the cities and many junior taxing districts. So most boards in the past have been rather covetous about hanging on to that money for county basic services. Now the latest spending has been to non-county services. I'm just saying as a comment, as a citizen.
The biggest chunk of spending was to our employees. How much did that cost us, Jim?
I'm sorry.
Never. Arguing with you is beyond. It's not.
There's another point of view, Mike, and I know they have a problem.
First of all, not $1's gone to the port yet because it's been held up by the treasurer, which I'm sure you completely agree with that process. And number 2, nobody's gone to the city. The only spending has been to our employees. The big chunk of spending was to our employees and increasing their request because of asks that they've come and asked for people. That has got to be the biggest chunk of spending this year. The $300,000 to the homelessness is to implement the county homelessness plan that you signed off on. So that's a county program. I don't understand this big spending spree you're talking about. You have no facts.
So are you done for 30 seconds?
Well, no, if you continue to spout things that aren't true, I'm not done.
Well, if you were active getting the 2 funds for homelessness years ago, you would understand about the sunsetting of those funds and how much revenue comes in. It's an issue to continue a sustainable fund to work on homelessness. It's an issue. And you, as far as I know, you haven't lobbied in the legislature to create those 2 funds, nor to maintain those 2 funds. So
I've chosen never to lobby the legislature on any issue.
I just said on those 2 funds.
I never have lobbied the legislature.
Right. And so not helping get revenue, I'm not going to take your criticism, my activities, trying to raise a lot of revenue when I was in your seat, that's all. So secondly, besides
criticizing you for raising revenue, I didn't criticize you for that.
Secondly, so the other day in the paper, there was reference to the arbitration settlement. Regardless of how you came down on that, there was a reference to cutting county employees because there wasn't the money or the desire to settle with a payment. To me, that's a bad sign. If I was a county manager, I'd be perplexed because there are ways to take care of that settlement. And during the negotiations, there could have been a different atmosphere.
Which would put people to 40 hours a week.
Let me
just
stop.
not being fair.
Let me just caution my colleagues that that particular matter is subject of litigation at this moment, so we would be well advised not to comment on that. So.
Well, it's not being fair to criticize us for not giving money for work they didn't do when we moved them to 40, which was what they wanted. How can that be wrong? How can you find that not good policy to take your people to 40? Why is that wrong?
So we could go on all day with kind of a common argument here.
Well, you want to answer my question?
I'm not going to answer that one because you'll interrupt with another one, which is, my overall concern is, here was a very predictable system of budgeting in Clallam County. And in 6 months, a lot of that has changed. Not just on the actual expenditure, but proposed expenditures, and then the whole concept of getting around a public hearing. It's just a concern to a citizen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
You're not just a citizen. I know you think of yourself that way, but you were part of the process for 6 months, and the process hasn't changed. And that's what I disagree with, is you're at hominem attack on how we're doing business when it's exactly the same process. It is, Jim. Unless you change something, no change in the same process. We're here today because of the charter requires us. We're having public hearings today on the budget. So
let me ask the pleasure of the board to close the hearing. Let me ask one more time if there's anybody else that wants to provide comments or testify. Yes, sir.
I plan on speaking after hearing the tirade for the last few minutes. My name's Dan Beta. I'm a citizen in Port Angeles. I live at 207 Walcott Street. Thank you, Mike Doherty, for speaking up for the citizens. We've all been seeing in the newspapers process that, in our viewpoint, maybe we don't fully understand it, has been attacked, and a lot seems to be going on to try to change that process that Blakely is referring to. I've been coming to meetings fairly regularly over the last few months, and I've heard Mike himself talk about, frankly in tears, I remember a particular meeting, about how he felt bad for not doing enough for citizens and leaving all this reserve, and it come across like your intent was to spend down that opportunity fund. And then you go off on Medicare with the idea of, well, we haven't spent it yet. I guess what you're trying to say, we've all seen in the papers where you're trying to spend it. I don't know if I'm really on track here or not. I'm not an expert in these matters, but it sure appears like something stinks. How about we all get a little bit honest, try to take care of people's business right. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you.
You know, I too want to echo some of the earlier remarks made by former Commissioner. I'm relatively new at watching these meetings, but I'm surprised to see all the ideas that come out, like $500,000 for the Economic Development Council.
Dale, if you wouldn't mind, can I get your name and address?
It's still Dale Wilson, P.O. Box 817, Port Angeles. Thank you. So, you know, maybe what, and I don't talk to Mike that much, but maybe some of the things he's talking about was they floated the idea of bringing $500,000 to the Economic Development Council, and until a citizen filed suit to stop that, and then there was $150,000 that did go to the Economic Development Council. And then there's been some ideas that have been floated along and pulled back, and frankly, no matter what side of the political spectrum you come down on, it doesn't seem like there is a lot of continuity or strategy or follow-through in a lot of these things. It seems like that there is a government by trial, and if it works, then great, we're well on our way. If it doesn't work, we'll just draw back and do something else. So, and I'm trying to be as unbiased as I can in this. I sense what I think Mr. Doherty's talking about, and so I think that's a perspective that is out there in the community, and whether it's true or not, you might give some nod to the fact that it is a perception that's in the community, and as we all know, perception is reality to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that,
Let me just say that. Let me say this, Dale. So you're telling me that it's irresponsible, it's not good government to just throw out ideas and then have the hearings and have the public that the idea, which I didn't support initially, for $500,000 to the EDC, many people came here and all of that was changed. Somehow, that's actually not a good process. So we should just keep our ideas to ourselves, not throw out any ideas, not have the public hearing today on the $300,000, not have the public hearing today on the budget. Just quietly go about our business, have no public hearings, and really just keep it all in-house. And then somehow the public would trust us that, in fact, by throwing out new ideas and having public meetings, and then we've had more people in this room this year than in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, many, many times over. Somehow that is bad government, because we're trying to figure out what's right for our community, and we don't. And I, as one commissioner, have admitted multiple times I don't have all the answers, but I am willing to look at lots of solutions. And all of those issues have been completely vetted because you've been here, you've been writing about it, the newspaper's been writing about it, Commissioner Doherty's been reading about it, many other people have been coming and pretty much routinely criticizing this board. That if in fact we just lived with our budget as adopted last year, done nothing, had no new ideas, that somehow that we would have served the public better and the public would have more trust, and we had no public meetings, no hearings, and no new ideas. That's what you're telling me on July 21st, that our problem was we actually came up with new ideas, new solutions, and had public meetings, and because we've been roundly criticized over and over again, that somehow we're failing the public in our duties. That's what I get from you guys.
No, sir, that's not what I said, but since you went into some of those weeds, I'll go with you. I think it's dumb to give $1 million to the port. They already have taxing authority. They have a direct property, your property, and everybody's property in here, and they have no business plan. They have just suddenly come out of the ether with an idea to recycle composites. Never been done before in this state or many states around us, but yet you guys thought it was such a great idea, you threw $1 million at them just like that. That's a little bit nutty, folks, because first of all, they don't have a business plan. They don't have a source for composites to recycle. They don't have a market for composites that might get recycled. And you have, all of you, I think, it was unanimous to just throw $1 million at a pie-in-the-sky idea that can't possibly work under its present business plan because there is no business plan. So that kind of gives the community an idea that you don't know what you're doing. So that's not what brought me up here the first time. The first time it was because I thought there was a perception that there was a lot of screwy stuff going on out here. And yes, I do think that the composites idea, and you're throwing $1 million at it without any antecedent, you got to take the community with you and bring more. And also that was done, as I recall, without a public hearing. So what's all I'm suggesting is when you have these ideas, take the community along with you. Give them all the information they can. Take all the feedback from the community that you can possibly get, and then come down on the side that you really, really think is in the best interest of the most in the community.
And with this will have a public hearing, and maybe some of us will change our mind based on the public input. The public demanded a public hearing, and they're getting a public hearing. Why is that wrong?
No, it's a great idea. I think more public hearings the better. I think
we were criticized today for somehow, it's messy. Democracy is messy. When you have a nice, tight team of one-party control, it can all be controlled and the message can be controlled. You know what? I don't play under those rules. I like the messiness. I like the give and take. I like the debate. I'm not going to sit up here and be a pincushion and I never have. Multiple times, believe me. Right now, we have a situation where basically people that are the left of the board are unhappy. But over the years, people to the right of the board were completely unhappy, and I would give and take with them just as much. So I'm pretty much an equal opportunity. I got both parties that don't like me, so I'm probably actually pretty comfortable where I'm at. My point is that I don't buy the argument that in a public hearing, we're not having enough public hearings. Give me a better argument. Your argument that it's a boondoggle, that you don't agree with the $1 million to the port and they don't have a business plan, I can respect that. But the fact that I get criticized for not having public hearings in a public hearing, I'm not going to sit here and let somebody say that. I don't care who they are. And I'm not going to apologize for coming up with ideas. You're against the sales tax cut. I actually believe that sales tax is one of the most regressive taxes in our society that it hurts the poor much more proportionately than it hurts the wealthy. Why Democrats, why liberals don't support more sales tax cuts, I don't understand. They're not being intellectually honest. Because rich people can buy whatever they want. They don't care what the sales tax rate is. But a single mom going to a store trying to buy the necessary items, that sales tax cumulatively impacts their quality of life. Those are the arguments that somehow this was just a right-wing Republican agenda to cut taxes. It isn't. It's to help the poor people. And I believe that many progressives agree with that. I believe that many progressives understand the damage that a sales tax has done to our society over the years. You want to get me started on wage why we're not paying living wages. You know that Walmart, people who work at Walmart, they're a net drain on government services. People who work at Costco are a net positive to government services.
Who approved them locating here?
What's that?
Who approved them to locate here?
I didn't know the year before I came here.
But that's one of the things that a group like yourselves have to decide.
Now, I can keep my mouth shut and not be criticized by saying that, but I'm not willing to.
Mike, I don't think I criticize you. I just criticize some of the decisions that were made. I like you, Mike, I always have. But here's one last thought. If you really wonder about the sanity of this $1 million to go to the port, ask Jim, the chairman of the board, ask him if he would advise his financial clients to invest in this scheme. And I think that would give you all the information you need to know about whether Jim Powell would advise his clients to invest in this particular composites recycling. If he does recommend it for his clients, then pull your money out of his investments. Thank you.
Okay. All right. What's the pleasure of the board as regards to closing the hearing? Move to close the hearing. I'll second. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. There's no action here, but I do have a couple of comments and one question. And I would just note that in a previous discussion at a work session, the commission asked the county administrator, amongst other things, to take a real close look at the level of reserves for the general fund, just to make sure that we're leaving only the necessary funds in the reserve for this reason. Inflation in Seattle last year, 2014, was 1.7%. The last number I remember hearing as far as the investment returns, the interest rate of return on idle cash here at the county was 0.9%. So the arithmetic tells me that there's a negative 0.8% of what I call economic dry rot on money that's in the bank. And I have often said that given that, it's far better public policy for us to get that money out of the bank and to work somehow in some way, in a positive way for our citizens. That's the analytical basis, very simply stated, for what I think is good public policy about the level of general fund reserves in particular. And of course, our policy calls for at least 10% fund balance. In general, correct me if I misstate this, but anyway, for separate funds, 10%.
Way more than that, 8 or 9 million.
Well, we have two separate policies. One says a minimum of 10% in every single fund, which applies to general fund as well as the others.
Correct.
And then the general fund has a separate policy that calls for a specific level of reserves for 7 different items that at the moment adds up to $7.5 million. There. So it supersedes the 10% just for the general fund.
And then on top of that, for general purposes, uncommitted, there's a 5%.
Yes, that was 5% above the 7.5.
Expenditures.
That's correct.
Adds on to the 7.5. So So my
Altogether, we need about 8.7 million at our current expenditure level minimum.
So for the
to
general
meet
fund
policy.
for fiscal 15, that's the minimum,
Yes,
that's the floor
that is the floor.
that we've established in policy
Right.
for the general fund level reserves.
Yes.
Anything beyond that is what we've been discussing.
Our overall funds, the overall reserves have been routinely between 30 and 40 million.
Yeah.
That's correct.
If you're looking at roads and all the other special funds, that adds onto that.
Because each of those other funds has to have the minimum 10%.
That's correct. So all
And
added
and
in,
almost all of them have much, much more than that.
all added in, that's a substantial amount of cash that's sitting in the bank.
It is, earning next to nothing.
And it's, by my
Which we
wisdom,
took out of the taxpayer dollar pockets, put in the bank, earn no interest, and do nothing good for our community with it. That's the legacy that we have in Clallam County.
so,
And then somehow, somebody explain to me why that's good government.
right,
To take money out of everybody's pockets, stick it in the bank, and not spend it.
right.
30 to 40 million dollars. Why is that somehow, boy, the optimal way that the government should run?
So to sum it up, on an economic basis, we have a negative 0.8% return. And we've closed the public hearing, Mr. Wilson. I'll reopen general comments here in a minute after we get done talking, and I'll invite you back up.
I gotta go. I got a ferry to catch.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks. So,
I'll shut it off when we're done.
yeah, thanks, Trish. I lost my train of thought there. So,
Negative,
negative 0.8% of what I euphemistically call economic dry rot. So that can be solved by getting a higher rate of return or minimizing the exposure to that economic dry rot. So that's my kind of reaction. The second thing I would observe is that the Clallam Transit sales tax has been a fairly stable tax imposition for a long time in history, and that is one of the true countywide sales tax levies. And so therefore, I think it provides a pretty good basis to gauge economic activity. And over the last couple or 3 years, at least, in my observation as a member of the Transit Board, that has seen those sales tax remittances to the Transit Board have seen a significant, and I would say material increase. So there is some evidence that the Clallam County economy, at least as far as represented by sales tax collection seen by Clallam Transit, has been on a mild upswing. You can measure per capita income, and I can't measure it. The Department of Commerce, the Federal Department of Commerce measures it, as well as median household income. Those two curves, and I wish that I brought those graphs with me here today, as adjusted for inflation seen in Seattle, are going in different directions. So that, as an indicator of community wealth, seems to be a little bit confusing. One is going down on an inflation-adjusted basis, median household income. One is going up on an inflation-adjusted basis. So I'm not sure what to make of that from an analytical basis. But certainly, the county fiscal policy can have an impact on local economy, in particular, the things that we'll discuss in a couple of weeks regarding opportunity fund expenditures, because the express purpose of that fund is to provide for infrastructure upon which the private sector can build and grow and provide economic increase for the county and jobs and so forth. Okay, so that's my commentary. I do have one question. I had a conversation with a gentleman, and I'm sorry for the length of the hearing. Bear with me. And I don't necessarily need an answer today, but I wanted to throw this out as a thought piece for my fellow commissioners and for the administrator. Had a conversation with a gentleman who's in business, owns a business that has a fairly substantial inventory of personal property. I never had really thought of the personal property component of our property tax levy as opposed to the real property component of it. And in the course of the conversation with this gentleman, it occurred to me that if there is a way to reduce or maybe even eliminate under the Constitution and the laws of the state, the county levy on the personal property tax class of tax. That goes, I mean, it's not exclusively going to business because that tax is applied to things like boats and RVs and so on and so forth, but it certainly applies to business. I'm seeing a head shake back there, and I know very little about it. I'll just admit that right straight out. So my theory, at least anyway, is I'd like to explore the possibility of some tax relief, property tax relief for businesses and families that are levied on their personal property. And Pam might tell me that's impossible, but I wanted to bring the question out today anyway, just to kick it around a little bit. So with that, I've exhausted my knowledge of property tax. And Pam, if you want to educate me a little bit right now, or we can do it later, that's fine too.
Well, a couple of good places to look for it is at the Department of Revenue. They have a couple of pamphlets. One says personal property tax. I brought some copies for you.
Thank you very much.
And another one is Homeowner's Guide to Property Tax. In the state of Washington, property taxes across the board is the same levy rate for both personal and real property because of the uniformity of Washington.
Right.
So it would take a constitutional change, I believe, to change this, to change the differences between personal and real property.
I just happened to bring a copy of Article 7, and this is what made me think of this, actually. Article 7 of our state's constitution that's entitled Revenue and Taxation. Let me just read very briefly one sentence out of this thing. It says, all taxes shall be uniform upon the same class of property within the territorial limits of the authority levying tax and shall be levied and collected for public purposes only. So real estate is one class of property. Personal property is a different class of property, excuse me. So that's what made the thought come to mind about, can we do inside of our property tax levy, can we treat real property differently than we treat personal property? And we've gone on too long today, so I won't ask for another long dissertation. But
I'd keep it simple and roll back the property tax relief.
Yeah.
The history of this county was that we collected every tax imaginable, put it in the bank and didn't spend it, and have amassed reserves that are so large as to have not helped our economy. In over a 10 to 15 year period, we've seen our community degrade with lack of economic growth, more need for social services, of which we release very little money, and getting criticized even today to release the $300,000. We get criticized to cut taxes. In my opinion, we've tried the raise every tax and put it in the bank approach. That approach has completely failed our community, and then much more in the cut the taxes and spend some reserves to get that money working in our community, because clearly, under any economic format, to raise every tax imaginable and then stick it in the bank did nothing for our community. And over a 15-year track record, our community has not grown, our economy has not grown, our need for social services has done nothing but grow, and yet we release fewer and fewer dollars. We used to give money to United Way, and that was cut a few years ago. And so if the community doesn't want us to spend money, which clearly we get so much pushback on spending money, which seems strange to me, I don't know. I don't believe that I get pushback from why do we have $30 to $40 million in the bank, earning less than 0.1%. That's the pushback I get. And clearly, a record of raising taxes and putting it in the bank did not help our economy, did not help our community. And I think that I think for me personally, and I think that any elected official who would look at that and say, that didn't work, so let's try something new. And when you try something new, people criticize because it's change, and change, people don't like change. But raising taxes, putting it in the bank and not spending it makes no sense and did not help our community. And therefore, we sit here today with a high unemployment rate, a low wage base, houses that are being foreclosed, need for social services, and I think it's imperative that this board is trying to do two things. cut the tax rate and put some money in the community. And I'll be criticized for that all day long. I think that's a better approach than just raising taxes and putting it in the bank. And those are your two competing philosophies. And this board in 6 months, if that is a sea change, 15 years of one way of doing it, and then in 6 months we've actually tried something new. First of all, I don't think more public process hasn't been a part of it, but I think that is actually the community can accept that we're trying. So I have not been criticized for trying. People have difference of opinions. More people want tax cuts, less government spending. But I know one thing, I've not had one person come up to me and said, you know what, I'm glad you raised every tax you could, and I'm glad you put it in the bank for 15 years. Employees haven't said that. Unions haven't said that. Businesses haven't said that. Community leaders haven't said that. Nobody said you did the right thing by raising taxes and putting it in the bank. And our community is better for that. So I guess it is maybe a new day. And for those people who want to criticize, that's the track record. You look at when I took office, we had hardly any reserves. And I take full responsibility. I don't come and criticize people who sat. I take full responsibility. And I'll say that to you, Commissioner. I take full responsibility and have. We raised every tax and put it in the bank. We took every availability and put it in the bank. And that's the track record. And so, yeah, we built up reserves, way more millions of dollars. Today, the homelessness folks, this is a business. We should be looking at some sort of sustainable funding. So that's the track record. And it's competing ideas. But I don't think the community likes the fact that we raise taxes and put it in the bank. We have a nice big fat bank account. Government should have a big fat bank account. Government's here to serve people, not serve the bankers. And the bankers don't want our money right now anyway. So.
Let me reopen public comment phase.
And you know what?
Here's
Here's the beautiful thing. So I said I'm not going to run for office. I would love to run for office, and I would run on that platform. I'd be the first politician in history to say for 16 years I did it wrong, and I'm actually standing here before you saying it's time to do something different, and I'm willing to give it a shot. Because everybody says what I've done for 15, 16 years has been right. I'm telling you what I've done for 15 years is completely wrong, backwards, totally hurt our community, and I'd run on that, but I'm not going to run. So I guess people just have to live with that.
Run for city council for Port Angeles. I think you'd fit right in line.
This is
on that platform.
Let me starting to form here, Dale Wilson. I forget your address, but anyway, go ahead.
Are we ready to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Dale Wilson, Port Angeles, PO Box 817. Gentlemen, one of my wife's favorite programs is called Shark Tank. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but what happens is people come in with an idea that they have, and they sit before these very wealthy people who may or may not get them funded. Well, if the county has that much money sitting around and is not making any money on it at the bank, open up the Shark Tank. If you've got that much reserves, instead of $1 million going to the port, have 20 different people come in and bring you a very, very plausible, secure idea that they can do for $50,000. They're going to use that money to hire a couple of employees, and they're going to turn out a product or turn out a service that is going to be available. This is a sustainable manner, and you can also charge 2% interest and get more money back on these loans than you're getting now at the bank. So I urge you to think about having micro loans, as some people call them, the Shark Tank as some people call them, but I bet there's 25 to 30 to 40 to 50 entrepreneurs here that have an idea that $50,000 would allow them to start. I'd like to start a solar company to where I can start putting solar panels on people's homes. I think there's room for a mom and pop type business that would go out here and clean some of these boats in the harbor and charge by the foot. But there's a lot of small organizations or groups or individuals that could start a business and make a go of it and pay the county a good return with a $50,000 loan. So take that into consideration, please. Thanks.
Thank you. We could do that through the EDC. We'd have to fund another organization.
Well, we could not use taxpayer money to make loans to individuals.
We could give it to the EDC.
No, that's not constitutional.
Unfortunately,
okay, let me add something that I was remiss in not remembering on the first hearing regarding the $300,000. There was a piece of paper here at my place on the dais that was undated and unsigned, but it's entitled Serenity House, Asset Rich, Mission Poor. So with the, I'm sorry?
I think that's from David.
That would be mine.
That's for you? Okay. So with the board's, unless there's an objection, we will include that in the hearing record.
And I did tell Mr. Wilson by email that I gave it to the clerk of the board to include in the record.
Okay, good. So we're clear on that. Okay, that is it for today's business. And so, let's see here. We got a Board of Health meeting at 1:30 this afternoon, and that looks like it for the rest of the week. So we will adjourn this week's meeting.
One of the largest turnouts in your administration has been the no spray issue. People overwhelmingly said they wanted a change in that department's perspective. This is the time to begin that change. There are 3 positions open. The people that applied, and you're thinking of reappointing, are the same volunteers, and of course we appreciate their involvement in the past. But this is the time to start reaching out for other perspectives. You're elected to represent the people and their safety, and not just what the staff wants. I'm really asking you to rethink these appointments and start considering the overall structure of that department and start reaching out and getting a blend of perspectives, people that know other ways of doing things, and can make this a much safer community. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? All right, consent agenda.
Thank you. Item 1A is approval of vouchers for the week of July 13th, and item 1B is approval of minutes for the week of July 13th.
Adoption of the consent agenda.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Reports and presentations. Okay, Andy, you're up.
Finally. Good morning. Morning, Brasted, Environmental Health Director. I wanted to introduce our 2 new employees in environmental health. Andy Clallam, he's an environmental health specialist. He's going to be working on asset area. And this is Jessica Newberg. She is with customer service at the counter. She's got many years interviewing fishermen. So she's dealt with a lot of people coming here. So it's great to have. And the most difficult thing about them is that we have now 2 Andys and 2 Jessicas. And so we're still trying to sort that out. But I just wanted you to know and see how it applies.
Welcome. And I can tell you from personal experience, sailors are just the finest people in the world. And if you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell. Welcome. Glad you're here. Commissioner Chapman. Commissioner Beach.
I'm attending an RC&D meeting Thursday, an initiative that brought against is funding that we anticipated from Department of Commerce is not occurring. And so we're currently in a situation where we've got about 2 months cash flow to operate. And so we have some serious conversation about what to do about that. But when I heard about our financial situation, I stepped up and volunteered to be treasurer. I'd like to monitor this and make sure that we don't inherit any liabilities.
Okay. Thanks for following on that hammer. That's a significant task for the group. My only report is a conference call with the County Association Legislative Steering Committee last week. It was kind of a preliminary legislative session wrap-up conversation. there will be forthcoming a fairly exhaustive analysis of all the legislation that passed this session and has been signed into law by the governor that affect county government and probably city government as well. So that'll be forthcoming. It's in preparation right now. And the second purpose of the call was to modify the county associations, all of our legislative agenda, to account for the things that appear to be going nowhere in the legislature and or have been accomplished by the legislature. So the information that was presented for that, the agenda and the background material for that call is on the table for everybody to look at and see, and we'll be seeing show up in our email account here in the next several days, I'm sure, a kind of a post-session analysis and wrap-up from the County Association. They just did a great job of trying to shepherd the County Association's agenda through the legislature. And it was a tough session, as we all know. So that's my report. Administrator Jones.
Nothing for me.
Contracts and agreements.
Item 2A is an agreement with the Department of Commerce, Office of Crime Victims Advocacy for Victim Witness Assistance Program activities, as was
We advertised, the deadline was 4:30 yesterday, and we have three come in at 4:30, but they work for this board.
Adoption of the resolution.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. That was going to be my exact question too. So. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Item 3B is a notice of hearing to be held August 4th regarding proposed amendments to Policy 120, Board of Commissioners Operating Guidelines.
Adoption of the hearing.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion.
They're issuing notice.
Issuing the notice.
Notice.
Move to call for the hearing.
There was an amended motion as the second for the amended motion as well. Correct? Okay. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Item 3C is a notice of hearing to be held at 10:30 a.m. August 4th regarding a proposed grant from the Opportunity Fund to the City of Port Angeles.
I'll move the call for the hearing on August 4th. I have a question.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion.
On items 3C and 3D, I have a question for the county prosecutor. You've been advising us along the way, and I was just making sure you weren't part of our discussion yesterday, but we talked about moving forward with a public hearing regarding the City of Port Angeles grant request, Port of Port Angeles grant request. I just want to clarify with you that you're comfortable with the board's taking this next step to have a public hearing, since you've been advising us through this process.
Yes, very much so.
Do you have anything else you want to add?
I think, that's one of the issues that's obviously been at the heart of the disagreement. The treasurer has expressed her opinion that a public hearing would be helpful. Frankly, I think it does provide a nice opportunity for any interested folks to show up and provide their input. It also provides an opportunity for example, a presentation by the board as to what's happened and process considerations. So it's a nice opportunity for community to take and will help to educate the community and any inquiring minds about the proposals.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks. Okay, did we have a second of a move or? Okay, that was the discussion. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
And item 3D is a notice of hearing to be held at 10:30 a.m. August 4th regarding a proposed grant from the Opportunity Fund to the Port of Port Angeles.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mr. McIntyre?
Here.
Mr. Chapman? Here. Mr. Peach?
Here.
Administrator Jones?
Here. All right. Request for modifications and approval of the agenda.
As per yesterday's work session, I'm bringing forward to ask as item 3C, a notice of hearing to be held at 10:30 a.m. August 4th regarding a proposed grant from the Opportunity Fund to the City of Port Angeles. And as item 3B, a notice of hearing to be held at 10:30 a.m. August 4th regarding a proposed grant from the Opportunity Fund to the Fourth Grant.
Adoption of the amended agenda.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Public comment on agenda items.
No, you're going to be in the reports and presentations.
Okay. Just a moment there, Andy. We'll get you here in a minute. Public comment on agenda items. Please come forward. Ken, how are you?
Good morning.
I'll speak against the grant for the compost. I think that it's a very risky investment at best and a bad investment at worst. I think the county could use that money for better things than that project. I see the board has acquired more funding, so do they really need our million? We could probably use that for better things. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? See a hand in the back?
This is for an agenda item.
Yes, ma'am.
Charlie Shannon, in Washington. I want to comment on the appointments to the reappointments, I should say, to the Natchez Green Board. My concern is about these reappointments, though I'm very appreciative of many citizen volunteering. I know it's hard to get volunteers, but we need diversity in that department. And we need you to reach out to citizens that have different points of view. If people don't come forward to apply.
Discussed yesterday in work session, total grant award of $38,854.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Item 2B is an agreement with the Department of Social and Health Services, Juvenile Justice and Rehabilitation Administration for evidence-based expansion. As was discussed yesterday in work session, this is just a bridge contract to get to the fiscal year 16-17 final contract, which will be forthcoming.
Adoption. Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Item 2C is an agreement with the Department of Social and Health Services, Juvenile Justice and Rehabilitation Administration consolidated contract for fiscal year 16-17. Again, as was discussed yesterday in work session, it is a bridge contract to get to the final contract sometime in September.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Item 2D is an agreement with the Washington State Department of Transportation for improvements to the La Push Road. Maximum amount of money from WSDOT is $331,000, as was discussed yesterday in work session.
Adoption. Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
And item 2E is an agreement with the Washington State Department of Transportation Federal Highways Administration Federal Lands Access Program. And this is a funding match for improvements to East Beach Road, as was discussed in work session back on July 13th. And this documents a $229,500 county match on a $1,700,000 total project.
Move adoption. Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Administration.
Item 3A is a resolution appointing members to the Noxious Weed Advisory Board, namely Fred Grant, appointed to fill the position representing Geographic Area 1 for a term expiring July 1st, 2019, and 2, Sheila York Miller, appointed to fill the position representing Geographic Area 2 for a term expiring July 1st, 2019.
Kristen, how many applications? I didn't see how many
We
applications.
didn't receive any applications at all. And
That was going to be my question.
people indicate